The ideal thing in a studio is that the sound outside must not interfere with the sound inside. That's the ideal thing. You must know that. If not so, you're not going to, we were just about to start talking, they switched off the air conditioners. Now we know that by being switched off, we could get hot, but we know that the sound of the air conditioners will interfere with the sound, with the clarity of the sound internally, which will make the people outside. Now, Channel stands head and shoulders above a lot of other studios because they understand the ideals, the fundamentals, and they work so much towards the ideals. So as a country, we must come back to a position where we appreciate the imperatives of ideals and commit ourselves to working towards those ideals. We must realize, I just heard a statement from the officer. I'm talking about the proliferation of NGOs in the Northeast, and he says, I've given them 3 weeks to either register or move out. My boss here in the Army will correct me, but it doesn't sound like a strategic statement from a military officer who would work primarily with intelligence. He's not coming to say, I give you 3 weeks, move out. No. He would have gathered the intelligence on all the NGOs, and he would have taken actions that we don't even know about. Even though we don't know how much of intelligence has gone into that, or what behind the scenes. You don't. That's not my understanding of a pronouncement, public pronouncement that should come from an officer. For me, doesn't come across. Yes, for me, it doesn't come across as neat as a politician could make such a statement. But an army officer must be. Let me end on this note. I was going from one city to the other in the US, and as we were seated, a group of young officers boarded the aircraft. As soon as, I think they had just been commissioned or something like that from the uniform, I didn't know. As soon as they boarded, everybody in the aircraft started clapping. Clapping. And I was like, I was looking for their boss, maybe Oga, maybe something. And I realized they all got in. Some people actually stood up, and they went to their seat and sat down. And I'm like, wow, imagine the respect, imagine the awe they have, not for generals, but for commissioned soldiers. That should be the ideal of our perception of the military, the people that protect us. But when you come across, I'm giving you 3 weeks, after 3 weeks, you get out. I think it's that mentality of the people that oppress us.
Let me come in here, because does this underscore the point that you raised, looking at the professional angle of who should be doing what at each point in time? Is that the kind of scenario that he saw played out when he was in the play?
I think that it's slightly different. You see, he was referring to a society where the armed forces have never lost their focus on their primary responsibility, which is, as we've said, fighting wars, security, defending the country, and so on and so forth. The army, the military in the United States, has never intruded itself into the political process. So the way the population see the army is fundamentally different from the way that we do here. You see, the army has, think about it, there is anybody, any Nigerian who's under the age of 40 has spent the vast majority of his life under a military government. The vast majority of his life under a military government. So the army is not seen fundamentally as the defender of the country. It is seen as the government, the people in power, those who wield the levers of coercion. The average man on the street doesn't see the army as the man who goes to fight on his behalf. He sees them as the people who, because of that concept of power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely. Now, think about it. In a military government, it's ruled by decree. It's ruled by orders. There's no requirement for consensus. There's no requirement for taking other people along. It is just, this is the way it's going to be, and you all fall in line. Now, there are times when that is useful, don't get me wrong, but that is not what the army is primarily set up to do. And my argument has been, and always will be, that the army's intrusion, the historical intrusion of the army into the politics of this country, has meant that neither party, neither country, nor army has benefited from that relationship.
Do you think that this intrusion that you're talking about,
Yes.
if you look at the political climate right now in Nigeria, does it speak of an intrusion for you, say, when we hear some of those kind of statements that are being proffered and some relationships that we've seen between the army and politicians? Are the politicians losing that space that will seem to suggest that an intrusion may occur?
Let me reflect something back to you. Since the return to civilian rule, we have had 4 presidents. 2 of them, including the current one, are army officers, both of whom were military heads of state. That's 50% of the civilian presidents we have had since the return to civil rule actually were soldiers. It is very hard to get out of that mindset when you have occupied that same position with a sense of absolute power, to go back to that position with a sense now that you have to kind of negotiate, you have to compromise, you have to strike deals, and that sense of, you know, things will be summarily done in a military way with immediate effect, it's very hard to get rid of, especially if that's the way you've been brought up. Let me then throw something else at you. In a military government, okay, there are whichever government is in power, you have an executive, that doesn't change. You have a judiciary, that doesn't change. What you don't have in a military government is a legislature. And in my opinion, it is not a coincidence that, and this is my opinion, other people might disagree with this, that the least well-functioning of the 3 arms of government we have at the moment is the legislature. Because for years, we haven't had practice at what a legislature does. Even under a military government, there were courts. Under a military government, there's an executive, the civil service, none of that changed. But we didn't have a legislature. Then think about the composition of that legislature as it stands, or as it has been over the last 19 years or so. There are more retired military people in the Senate or in the House of Representatives than you can shake a stick at. Now you add the combination of a lack of practice of running a legislature to a significant chunk of those people being ex-military people who, and you know, I'm one of them. You know, we have a way of thinking. We have a unitary chain of command. It is orders must be obeyed. You know, they're not a basis for discussion. They're not a basis for negotiation. This is the way it's going to be. Crack on and get on with it. That is a fundamental issue. I beg your pardon.